let's carry on now. We're still in the Griffin book, right? Our Griffin book on human rights, chapter 2, first step, right? So again, have to be patient. Still the first step, still laying out the ideas. We looked now at sections 2.1, 2.2. We're on 2.3 now. Proposal of one substantial account. So remember, that's that as opposed to a structural one, which is more of a logical one. Now it's going to be substantial, right? We're getting kind of into the meat of what he wants to talk about. But don't get too carried away because it's still kind of abstract even at this stage. So, but he's going to start, shall we say, putting more flesh on these bones. So the proposal of one substantial account. Now it's key that he says one. Why? Because remember, he's doing the bottom-up approach, so he's looking at what people have said, right? The varieties of people have said, and how do you find out what people have said, and how do you do the bottom-up approach? You go through the history, and so of human rights, and we looked at the medievals and what they sort of bequeathed, and it was linking up. Human rights bearers were really kinds of agents, right? And agents meant you have a certain kind of capacity or power. And originally that was sort of like imago Dei, like, well, God created you, but then that sort of theology stuff gets jettisoned. And the agent is this kind of locus of power, and power of what? Creative power to make itself into what it wants to be. And that's something we just value very highly, right? It's like, whoa, think about how much that's valued today, right? This ability to say creatively and to express yourself and say who you are. Okay, so again, that's old stuff, right? That goes back to the Middle Ages, and there's a sense of dignity in having this power and expressing this power as a freedom to create who you are. And it doesn't matter it's not so much what you're creating, it's the fact that you're expressing your creativity through your freedom and your power. That's what the key thing is. It's not the end, kind of product. It's the expression of it that we value so much, right? So let's look a little bit more at that. Tradition doesn't necessarily lead to one substantial account. You could go in different directions. But Griffin's going to take this line, the human life, right? He's just saying, he's flat-footed. He's going to say, look, I'm taking the idea that human life is unique, right? Yes, there are dogs and there are all kinds of critters and they may overlap with us. And maybe they overlap. We know that they overlap more than we used to think, right? And we know way more about zoology than Aristotle did. He knew a fair amount, but really, you don't study Aristotle's books on animals for anything more than largely antiquarian kinds of interests. Not the way you study his ethics. Now, some people might get mad and yell at me for that, but really, if you take courses in zoology at university from the science department, you're not studying Aristotle's zoology. You'll study that largely in a history department, and that's valuable, but not necessarily in a scientific way. So. But the point is that human life, Griffin's he's digging his heels in about that. It's largely unique. Why? Because even though many, like ravens or higher order primates, they might do things that look like rational behavior, what Griffin is using is that we alone, as far as we really know, and if others do it, other creatures do it well, then they come in and will adjust our notion of human rights accordingly. But for right now, we really are alone in one important sense, that we can, which is two things to this important sense. We alone conceptualize, we think about, we separate ourselves from and sort of look at it and think about it and mull it over and turn it around in our minds, this notion of the good life. Right? We all do that, right? Maybe not in that specific philosophical sounding way, but what do you want out of life? And if you say, oh, I'm at this age and I thought I would have something different, you do have some conceptualization of a good life. And not only do you conceptualize it, that we humans are unique in this, we pursue them, right? Or get upset that we didn't or something. But there is a connection in our minds between a good life and the pursuit of it. And when people actually do that, thinking about conceptualizing and adjusting, and this is an ongoing process because as we say in philosophy, there's kind of a dialectic between the concept of a good life and the pursuit of it. And as you pursue to instantiate this concept of a good life in your actual existence, in your day-to-day existence, that can change, right? So sometimes you careful what you wish for, you might get it. So then you change a little bit and you modify, you reconceptualize, and you continue the pursuit, it maybe slightly differently, of the, shall we say, the transformed perception or conceptualization of the good life. So this is a fairly complicated process. It doesn't seem to be the case that other creatures do this, right? That do dogs conceptualize a good life? They live one, hopefully, not all the time, unfortunately. But when a dog's living a good life, does the dog sit back and go, this is the good life, but maybe I could make it better? Maybe not. But again, Griffin's open, and he says in a number of places, well, if other creatures do it, then I guess we have to modify the terms we use. But what's going on here? Well, this conceptualizing, this pursuit, this is really, again, kind of us as agents. And we value this, right? And Griffin's not arguing for any of this. He's saying, look, we value this. This notion of ourselves as conceptualizing the good life, this is fundamental to who we are. And Aristotle, you can read him as it's fundamental to who we are, that we want to be happy, and we want to know how to get there and how to do it, and what's and do we have the skills to get there? Like, how do we pursue it, right? In the Nicomachean Ethics, it's like a handbook, right? You want to be happy? Of course you do. We all do. Who doesn't want to be happy? Your soul is broken if you don't want to be happy. That's Aristotle's line. Kind of tough-minded, but that's how he puts it. There are ways to go about it. You conceptualize a good life. Well, okay, you need some skills to pursue it. And that's what basically the Nicomachean Ethics is like. So you want to be happy, here's one way to do it. So we value ourselves as agents, and when we value something, we protect it, right? If there are things in your life that you value and you deeply value, you protect them. You value your car, you lock it, right? You protect it. If you really, really value your car, maybe you store it in the winter, right? And you don't drive it in the winter. You protect it from the elements. So this notion of thinking of ourselves as agent, valuing ourselves as agents, and then putting protections in, that is essentially what human rights are. They are protections of our agency. They are guardians, right? That human rights are, we call things human rights because they protect our agency, right? Keeping us as agents. This is, Kant does talk a little bit like this, that the most important thing is an agent, and it's entirely unique. Griffin doesn't quite go that far, but he's definitely in that notion that, the individual, the notion of an agent. So there are some very deep kinds of metaphysics that are, shall we say, the software that's running deep in the background here is playing out on the surface as well. Okay, so the central intuitive idea that he mentions a few times, he's mentioned this about 3 times in the book so far. He's mentioned it in the introduction to the book, and he's saying it again here, is that human rights are protections of our agency, essentially guardians of our personhood. Right? That's an old chestnut in philosophy. What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be human? And certainly not a chestnut limited to philosophy, because, science fiction writers write reams of books on, what does it mean to be a person when you've got robots running around or artificial intelligence coming after you? What's going on there? And of course, great novelists, it's all been about the human condition and what it means to be a person in the world of war, like in Tolstoy's books, or things like that. So the human condition is all, can be more metaphysical, talking about what it is to be a person per se, and that's usually more philosophy and science fiction. But what does it mean, to be a person in a concrete circumstance? That's usually the realm of great literature. Now, let's step back a little bit of an abstract view, but he's going to flesh this out. So again, keep in mind, this is the first step, so don't get too wed to anything. He's just sort of, putting up kind of the scaffolding, and the scaffolding is not necessarily the building, but it's a start. So an agent is tripartite, 3 parts. First, there's actually 2 parts that resemble each other. This first thing that we saw about linking up agency in the medieval with the notion of freedom. So we start off with a kind of liberty, right? And this liberty is the notion of autonomy. How do you understand autonomy? Just wait for a second. He's going to dig a bit more deeply into that in section 2.4. So we'll get to that. But this notion just of autonomy is mental autonomy. You're not being controlled, right? You're actually making your decisions. You're not just simply making your decisions because that's what you've been taught to do, and that you just make your decisions through like in the way that did you decide when I say what's 2 + 2 and you thought 4. Did you really decide that, or was that you just learned that and so that's just buried and burned into the base of your brain, that 2 + 2 is equal to 4? And so there would be many things that would just be associated, right? That's not really freedom of thought. That doesn't mean that's bad to know 2 + 2 is equal to 4. It's great to know that. You need to know stuff like that. But that's not what he's talking about. That's not really exercising your agency. If you wanted to exercise your agency in mathematics, it wouldn't just be shouting out, arithmetic propositions. So liberty just means autonomous. It's a kind of mental thing that it's a freedom of thought, right? You're actually associating and thinking about things without necessarily being predetermined. That is extremely controversial. That is, not everybody agrees with this notion that we even are free. Like maybe it's the case that everything I'm doing is, could have been anticipated. If somebody really could unpack the contents of my brain, they'd say, yeah, we know what he's going to say in that lecture. But again, Griffin's not going to dig into, sort of the metaphysics of mental freedom and whatnot. He's just saying that when we talk about agency, we have this notion of an autonomous sort of mental liberty. And of course, mental liberty is not very useful if you don't have anything else, right? You're just contemplating stuff. So you have to have sort of a material possibility, a capacity, some sort of physical sense that, if you have a conceptualization of the good life, you freely conceptualized your good life, that you have the ability to go pursue it. Some kind of physical ability, whatever that may look like. But we are physical beings in some way. And so you have to have some way to, shall we say, instantiate your freely conceived notion of the good life in the actual world, right? And how you instantiate that, well, whatever, motion of some kind of your body, however that works or whatever. But there has to be, just in the large sort of abstract sense, a kind of material possibility. So now we've moved from the mental to the physical. And last but not least, there's kind of what you might want to call a political possibility. John Stuart Mill in his work on liberty is very clear. He doesn't want to talk about this, whether or not we have this. He just wants to talk about agency down here, just in terms of, wherever the conceptualization came from, I don't care that much. But if you have the conceptualization of a good life, you should have the political liberty to pursue it. Right, so you have the capacity, the physical capacity, and no external force is blocking you from pursuing that life that you want to have. Indulging, as Mill likes to say, in the experiments in living, right? Classic liberal stuff. So you're not physically blocked by some kind of external power. So this is sometimes maybe more political. So this is just sort of the opening in terms of what he's going to talk about, because this is still pretty abstract, right? This is just sort of initially trying to come up with a substantial account. And remember, he doesn't want just a structural feature, right? So and so that's why that rejection of the structural account of agency that he talked about earlier gives us a hint that he's not going to be too thrilled about Kant, who has a highly formal, fascinating, but very formal structural account of agency and of morality too, right? The ontology is very formal, very structural. Griffin's not like that. He wants to keep the notion of agent, but shall we say have more of a corporeal, more socialized, physical kind of agent. Okay, so we've got our 3 parts. And again, because we highly value this. Why do we do that? He's not arguing that. Can't argue absolutely everything. We just value our agency. We value our personhood. We value this stuff. And so we put things in place to protect it. And that's human rights. It's essentially, they are guardians of the exercise of this thing that is a part of what we are, namely the exercise of being an agent. Now, that's just a start. See you next video.